Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse may be one of the best animated movies I have ever seen, so let's talk about it. As always, this video will have spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, head over to my shorts or my TikTok and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Going into this movie, it had a lot of hype, and if I do say so myself, it lived up to it. I mean, this movie might be just as good, if not better, than the first. The animation was stunning, action was great, and the characters, which drove the story, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, were phenomenal in this movie. So let's get into what this movie is about. So in this movie, Miles travels across the Spider-Verse and meets a whole society of Spider-Man. But once he learns that his dad is a canon event and must die, Miles goes out on his own and does things his own way to save his dad while Spider-Man 2099 and others try to stop him. All right, let's get into the good. And first off, this story was amazing. It did a phenomenal job at building the emotional stakes and making us care about what these characters went through in this movie. In this story, we did have a lot going on. I mean, we had multiple storylines being told between our three main characters. First off, we had Gwen wanting to find her band or belonging. And if you really dig into this movie and pull this movie apart, Gwen is kind of the silent hero of this movie. I mean, really looking into it, this is a Gwen Stacy movie almost, in my opinion, because she gets a lot of screen time. Her story is told beautifully. She has the best character arc by far in this movie, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But at this movie's heart, it is kind of a Gwen Stacy movie. And then we have Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099, who was played amazingly by Oscar Isaac, and he is trying to keep this multiverse together because of what he's learned in his past. This movie gave him a great backstory, made you understand him and empathize with him, making him sort of a great, I guess he was kind of the villain in this movie. It's essentially the Spot, but he was a good kind of secondary villain in this movie, but you really felt for him and understood why he was doing what he was doing. And then we have Miles, who is just trying to prove that he belongs with these other Spider-Man and that he deserves to be Spider-Man and that it wasn't a mistake that the spider from the other universe bit him. And at the end of the day, Miles just believes in saving everyone, and that's where him and Spider-Man 2099 kind of butt heads because essentially, yes, they both want the same thing, but their way of getting there is completely different, and it makes for a very interesting relationship between the two, which I think made the movie a lot stronger. I will also add that even though this movie had lots of cameos and Easter eggs, and believe me, there was a ton of them, it never felt overstuffed or distracted us from what the main three characters were doing. And next up for the good is the animation, and there is no question that this is some of the best animation that I have ever witnessed in my life. I mean, I could have sat in that theater for days and just stared at the screen because it was just beautiful. I don't know how many animation styles they blended in this movie, but each one was just stunning to look at. I mean, each universe had its own unique style and flair, and it was just really cool. In particular, the way they animated Hobie, aka Spider-Punk, was really creative. It looked like they animated him at a slower frame rate than everyone else, and it just worked really well, and honestly, he was just one of the coolest characters in the whole movie. But the way he was animated was so creative and cool and just really, I don't know, I guess elevated his character, but he was a fun character in this movie, and the way he was portrayed was great. Also, the use of color in Spider-Gwen's universe to convey emotion cannot go unnoticed because that was a great creative touch. It made all her scenes with her dad hit even harder emotionally because you were getting those blue depressed colors and we were focused on her, and then at one point she hugged her dad and you got these warm orange and pink colors, and it was just creatively, this movie is phenomenal. Like, whoever thought of that and thought to convey that, kudos to you, because Spider-Gwen's universe was very cool in the way they used colors and made you feel that emotion. Next up are the characters. Now, all the characters in this movie are phenomenal. They each had their own goals and motives, which helped enhance the story. We got a cast of new characters in Spider-Man 2099, Spider-Woman, Spider-Man India, and Spider-Punk, and they were all just so entertaining to watch on screen. But what made these characters so great, and this is something that I thought they did better in this movie than they did the original, and that was building the emotional stakes. I mean, hey, we even got a cool backstory for our villain in this movie, aka the Spot, which made him a lot more interesting because he kind of started out as kind of a joke in the beginning of this movie, and then as the movie went on, we kind of slowly saw him evolve into just a straight up menace to society and to someone that we're not sure if all these Spider-Men can beat. But I will say, and I did kind of mention this before briefly, but Gwen had the best story in this entire movie, as we saw her kind of find her belonging in this movie. And I loved what they did with her relationship with her dad, as that was kind of reconciled there at the end of the movie. And in my opinion, Gwen is really the only character in this movie that had a complete character arc, which is why this is secretly, in my opinion, this is what I think, this is secretly kind of a Gwen Stacy movie. But moving on to the next good thing, and that is the score and the music of this movie, and holy crap, was it great. Now the soundtrack was solid. I don't think it was as good as the first movie, but it was still a pretty solid soundtrack. But what I really want to touch on here is the score of this movie. The way the score was used was amazing, as it only elevated every scene it was in and really made you feel whatever emotion was in that scene. And one last thing for the good before we move on is the action. Now, this is a superhero film, so it's expected that the action is going to be great. And the action was. It had really cool sequences in this movie. The one they had in Manhattan, where I think it was Spider-Punk, Miles, Gwen, and Spider-Man India all fighting together there. And then the coolest action sequence, I think, of this whole movie is when Miles was running away from the Spider Society, trying to get away from them and try to go save his dad. That was just super cool, because not only did it show how OP Miles is, Miles also might be the strongest Spider-Man here, and I just think that's super cool because he has just about every power in the world. I mean, the dude can go invisible, he's got his Venom Blast, and then obviously he's got every other power that all the other Spider-Man have. But all in all, the action was just as creative and just as good as the first movie. Now let's get into the so-so. And as great as this movie was, in my opinion, it did have some minor pacing issues. Now this is probably because this is a part 1 to a part 2, so they spent a little more time than usual on a couple of things. Now this wasn't terrible by any means, but it did take us about 20 minutes to see Miles for the first time, and I understand that they kind of had to build Gwen's character up a little bit in that first part, but it did feel a little bit slow in my opinion, as they were kind of building things to get to the eventual, travel across the Spider-Verse part of the movie. But once again, I don't think the pacing was bad by any means, and I don't really think it took away from the movie at all. I just wish in certain parts of the movie we could have sped it up just a little bit. And next up for the so-so is the ending, and that is because it kind of made this movie feel incomplete in the end. And yes, I get it, this is a part 1 to an eventual part 2 in Beyond the Spider-Verse in about a year from now. But when this movie ended, I just felt like there was way too much that hadn't been resolved yet. As I said before, the only character that had a complete arc in this movie was Gwen Stacy, and that's kind of why I've been saying this is secretly a Gwen Stacy movie. But this movie essentially built you all the way up to what you thought was about to be an amazing climax, and then just cut you off right there before it started, and we got that to be continued there right at the end. And I just think personally we could have resolved just a couple more things. We didn't need to resolve everything, but just a couple more things to make this movie feel a little bit more complete than it was. But then again, yes, we are getting a part 2, and they're gonna have to resolve a lot in that second movie, and I'm excited to see it. And finally, let's get into the bad. Now, obviously, there isn't that much bad in this movie, but this just could be me, but this movie seemed kind of quiet to me in like the first 30 minutes of the movie. More specifically, the dialogue. Now, when Gwen was voicing over in the beginning of the movie, I could barely hear it, and I really had to focus in to hear what she was saying because it was a little quieter. I mean, I was sitting in the theater wishing someone had a remote or I had a remote just to turn it up a little bit because it was really quiet there in those first 20 to 30 minutes. But after that, it was pretty much fine, didn't really have any problem with it. But those first 20 minutes, it's kind of hard to hear, so I'll just kind of leave it at that. But other than that, Across the Spider-Verse was a phenomenal movie. It was visually stunning with lots of emotion and great characters. It had plenty of Easter eggs and cameos for the Spider-Man nerds out there, and is one of the best animated films I have ever seen, and I cannot wait for the next movie. Those are my thoughts on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shop easyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.